The Forestry Service gave me a satellite phone, a map that was 3 years out of date, and a pair of boots that didn't quite fit. That was the full extent of their preparation for sending me alone into 400 kilometers of Siberian Taiga for a 6-week timber survey. I was supposed to walk transects, count trees, photograph damaged sections, log coordinates, and radio in every 72 hours. Standard work. I had done it before, not in Siberia, but in similar terrain, similar conditions, similar silence. I was 31 years old, and I had been doing forestry surveys since I was 24, and I was good at it. I knew how to be alone and large, in different spaces. I thought I knew what that meant. I was wrong about that in ways that took me a long time to fully understand, and that I am still, in some respects, working through now. My name is Aleksei Voronov. I grew up in Novosibirsk, studied environmental science, spent my 20s moving between contracts, Karelia, the Urals, the Altai foothills, one 8-month stint in the Krasnoyarsk region that I remember as a long cold dream of spruce and silence. The taiga is not one thing. People who have never been inside it tend to think of it as a uniform mass. Dark trees, snow, cold, bears. The reality is more varied and stranger than that. There are sections that feel almost park-like, stands of larch where the light comes through golden and the ground cover is thin, and you can walk for hours feeling almost cheerful. There are sections of dense spruce so close-grown that you move through them sideways, and the light disappears entirely 3 meters in, and the silence has a quality I can only describe as pressure. And there are sections that feel wrong in ways you cannot explain through any of the ordinary frameworks. Not dangerous in any specific sense, not ugly, not dark, just wrong. As though the forest is arranged differently than forest should be. As though something about the geometry is off. I had encountered this feeling before in other places. I had always attributed it to tiredness, to the particular effects of prolonged isolation on the human mind. I no longer attribute it to that. The contract was with a regional timber company through a government environmental compliance program. 6 weeks, starting in late August. My base point was a logging road that ended 30 kilometers north of the nearest settlement, a village called Verkhnai that had 400 residents and 1 functioning shop. I drove there with my equipment, left my car at the edge of the logging road, and started walking north on the morning of the 23rd of August. The weather was cool and clear. The forest opened around me like a door closing behind me, which is not a metaphor I would have used at the time, but which seems accurate now. I walked for 4 hours before I made my first camp, set up the tent in a stand of pine on a slight rise, cooked on my camp stove, logged my first set of coordinates. Everything was normal. Everything felt exactly like what it was supposed to be. That first night, I slept well, and woke to frost on the tent fly and a pale blue sky through the trees, and I started work. The survey work itself was methodical and absorbing in the way that methodical outdoor work can be. I moved along pre-calculated transect lines using a GPS unit, stopping every 200 meters to measure and photograph a fixed radius plot of forest. I recorded tree species, diameter, height class, crown condition, signs of pest damage, fire scarring, logging disturbance. The data was granular and specific, and it required full attention, which meant that for most of each working day, I was not thinking about being alone, or about the size of the forest around me, or about anything except the work directly in front of me. This was familiar and comfortable. The work was a container, and I was inside it, and everything outside the container was manageable. That is how I had always thought about it. The container and what was outside it. For the first 3 days, this worked well. The first thing I noticed was the tracks. I found them on the morning of the fourth day, crossing one of my transect lines at an oblique angle, heading roughly northwest, which was deeper into the survey area, away from the logging road. They were not bear tracks. I knew bear tracks. I had been finding them since the first day, and the forest showed evidence of bear activity throughout. Scratched bark, overturned logs, scat. These were different. They were large, larger than my boot, which is a size 44. Roughly human in shape, but wrong in proportion. The toes too long, the stride too wide for a person of the height the foot size suggested. I crouched over them for a long time, photographed them carefully from multiple angles, measured the stride length with my measuring tape. 2 meters between steps. A person would need to be well over 2 meters tall to have a natural stride of 2 meters, and the depth of the impressions in the soft ground suggested significant weight. I took my photographs. I made a note in my log. I told myself, large person, unusual gait, possibly a local hunter or a researcher from another project. The taiga is large, but it is not uninhabited. There were hunters who used this area seasonally. There were, occasionally, researchers. The explanation was improbable but available, and I chose it, and I kept walking my transect. That night I heard something outside the tent. Not a bear. I knew what bears sounded like moving through forest, the specific crash and shuffle of something large and unsubtle. This was quieter, more deliberate. A sound of movement that stopped, and then resumed, and then stopped again, as though whatever was making it was pausing to assess. I lay in my sleeping bag and listened with the focused, controlled attention of someone who has spent a lot of nights in tents in the wilderness and knows that most sounds have explanations. I ran through the explanations. Wind in the canopy? No. There was no wind. A branch falling. The sound was too continuous and directional. An elk or reindeer moving through. Possible, but elks moved more heavily and less carefully. Something small. No, the sound had weight to it. I could feel the very faint vibration in the ground through the tent floor when it stopped close. It stopped close twice. The second time, whatever it was remained still for a period I estimated at 4 minutes. I was counting slow seconds in my head, a habit from field work, and during those 4 minutes I did not move, and my sleeping bag was damp from my own sweat despite the cold, and my hand was on the small folding knife I kept in the tent pocket, which I was fully aware was an inadequate response to anything larger than a medium-sized dog. Then the sound moved away, northwest, and after a while the ordinary nighttime sounds of the forest resumed, and I lay awake until dawn. In the morning I found the tracks again, circling the tent, not once, 3 times, the same overlapping loop, as though whatever had made them had walked around my tent 3 times in the night, and then left the way it came. The stride was the same as the tracks I had found on the transect. 2 meters. Northwest. I measured and photographed everything with the systematic attention of a person who is using precision as a way of not thinking about what the data implies. I called in my 72-hour check early. The satellite phone connection was poor. I reached the base operator, confirmed I was at my logged coordinates, reported the tracks as a wildlife observation requiring follow-up, did not describe the circling pattern. The operator sounded bored and distracted. He confirmed my next check-in time, and the line went to static. I stood holding the phone in the pale morning light among the circling tracks, and I thought about the 400 kilometers of forest around me in every direction, and I thought about the logging road 30 kilometers to the south. And I thought, one more day. I will work one more day, and if anything else happens I will begin walking south. That was the wrong decision. I recognized it as the wrong decision at the time, and I made it anyway, because I had 6 weeks of contract work to complete, and because part of me, the professional part, the scientist part, wanted more data. I wanted to know what I was dealing with. I worked my transect for the 5th day with the specific heightened alertness of someone trying to look in multiple directions at once. I stopped frequently, turned, scanned the tree line, listened. Nothing moved that I could see. The forest was as it had always been, vast, indifferent, beautiful in the flat, gray morning light that came through the canopy in long slanted bars. I completed 4 transect plots before noon, ate lunch sitting with my back against a large pine so that nothing could approach from behind, and continued south-trending transects in the afternoon, keeping my route closer to the logging road direction than my plan required. Small adjustments. I was not panicking. I was being rational. The professional mind is very good at calling fear by other names. Caution, repositioning, data quality concerns, logistical prudence. I was exercising logistical prudence all the way back toward the road I had walked away from 5 days earlier. The forest said nothing about this. It did not need to. It was on the 5th afternoon that I first saw it. I was moving between plots, checking my GPS, and I looked up at a ridgeline perhaps 80 meters to my north. A slight rise in the terrain, a dark line of spruce against the gray sky, and there was something standing there, on 2 legs, still, watching me. I stopped and looked at it, and it looked at me, and I held that for a period I cannot accurately estimate, but that felt like a very long time. It was tall. The relative scale against the spruce trees behind it suggested height significantly greater than a normal person, close to 3 meters or more, and it was dark, a deep non-reflective darkness that did not quite match the shadow behind it, and its proportions were not right. The shoulders too wide, the arms too long, hanging at a position no human arm hangs at rest. The head large and set forward on the neck in a way that felt wrong the longer I looked at it. It did not move. I did not move. A woodpecker worked at a tree somewhere to my left, and the sound was very loud in the silence, and I was aware of it the way you are aware of irrelevant things when something important is happening, with a strange peripheral clarity. The thing on the ridgeline was watching me with the complete, unblinking stillness of something that has watched things for a very long time and knows how to do it. Then I looked down at my GPS to get my coordinates. A reflex, the automatic response of a data recording mind that does not know how to stop being a data recording mind, even in the presence of something that has no category. And when I looked up, the ridgeline was empty. Not gone as in walked away. Gone as in simply no longer there. The trees, the gray sky, the empty slope. I stood in the particular silence that follows something like that, and then I turned south and I started walking. I did not run. Running in taiga terrain is dangerous. Roots, uneven ground, hidden drops. I walked as fast as I could safely walk, and I did not look at the ridgeline again, and I kept my breathing as controlled as I could manage, and the forest was quiet around me and stayed quiet. I made my camp that evening a full kilometer closer to the logging road than my plan required, and I called into base with a story about a GPS malfunction requiring me to reposition, and I sat in my tent with the entrance fully zipped and the knife in my hand, and I ran through what I had seen with the systematic attention of a person who uses analysis as a coping mechanism. Bears standing upright. Bears do this, briefly, to look over obstacles, and at distance the proportions can seem strange. Person in dark clothing. Possible, but the height, the arm position, the complete stillness for what I estimated at 2 minutes or more. My own mind, fatigued by 6 days of isolation, producing images from the material of the tracks, and the night sounds. I ran through each possibility, and I did not find any of them adequate. And at a certain point I stopped running through them and lay in the dark and simply held what I knew. I had seen something on a ridgeline 80 meters away. It had been watching me. It had made no sound and no movement, and then it was gone. Whatever it was large enough to make 2-meter stride tracks in soft ground and patient enough to walk 3 circles around a sleeping person's tent without waking them. These were the data points. I held them in the dark, and I did not sleep much. And in the morning I began walking south in earnest. The 6th day, I covered ground faster than any other day of the survey. Not running, walking hard, with purpose, stopping every 30 minutes to listen, keeping to the more open terrain when I could choose. I had repacked my bag in the dark before dawn, methodically, putting the GPS and the satellite phone in the top pocket where I could reach them without stopping. My notes were in the waterproof case at the back. I left the survey maps folded as they were. I knew the bearing I needed, and the bearing was south, and the maps were secondary to the compass and the road. This is what preparation looks like when it is also retreat. You give it the vocabulary of professionalism and you move. The forest in the early hours was dark and cold and absolutely still. The ground was frozen in the open sections and soft in the shadows where the frost hadn't reached, and I picked my way between the two, keeping my footfall as quiet as I could manage without thinking too carefully about why I was keeping it quiet. The birch sections were loudest, the leaves underfoot, dry and crisp, announcing every step. I moved through them faster and tried not to let the noise bother me. In the spruce sections, the ground was carpeted with needles, decades of them, soft and silent, and I moved differently there, slower, more careful, listening to the quality of the silence rather than the sounds. The silence in the spruce was thicker than in the birch, more present. I noticed this and noted it and kept walking. The sky lightened slowly. By 8 o'clock, I could see clearly in all directions without the headlamp, and I turned it off and put it in my pocket and felt slightly better for having both hands free. I had the knife on my belt. This was a formality, and I knew it was a formality, but formalities matter when you are trying to keep the rational part of your mind in charge of the rest of it. The knife was for cutting rope, for first aid, for the 100 small practical tasks of solo field work. I adjusted it on my belt and kept walking south. The forest showed no particular sign of anything. Birds, a squirrel, the distant sound of wind in the high canopy. At mid-morning, I crossed a stream and stopped to refill my water filter and eat, sitting on a rock with my back to the water and my eyes on the tree line on the far bank for 10 minutes before crossing. Nothing there. The sky was higher and brighter than the previous days, a pale winter blue beginning to show through the cloud cover, and I felt, with the part of me that wanted to feel it, that the thing on the ridgeline had been a one-time event, a product of specific conditions, unlikely to repeat. I held this feeling carefully, the way you hold something that might be true and might not be, and I walked south through the improving light and let myself want it to be true. This feeling lasted approximately 90 minutes. Then, just past noon, I heard it to my east. A sound of movement through undergrowth, keeping pace with me at a distance I estimated from the volume at 30 or 40 meters. Not crashing through, moving carefully, with that same deliberate quality I had heard on the 4th night outside the tent. Moving when I moved, stopping when I stopped, which I tested twice, slowing to a halt and standing still, and the sound slowing and stopping, and then me starting again and the sound starting again, maintaining the distance exactly, pacing me, accompanying me south. I kept walking and I did not alter my direction or speed, because I had the instinct, untested, unreasoned, but strong, that changing speed or direction would be read as something, as acknowledgement, as a shift in the nature of what was happening between us, whatever that nature was. So I walked at the same pace, south, toward the road, and it walked 30 to 40 meters east of me, south, and we walked like that for what my watch told me was 41 minutes. Then the sound stopped. I kept walking for another 10 minutes before I allowed myself to stop and listen. Nothing. My own footsteps in the leaf litter. The forest around me, ordinary and still. I stood for perhaps 2 minutes, listening to the nothing, and then I kept going south, and the thing, whatever it was, did not follow me out of the trees. Or if it did, it was silent enough that I couldn't hear it. I still am not entirely sure which of those possibilities I find more comfortable. I made the logging road at 4 in the afternoon. I came out of the tree line onto the rutted gravel and stood in the open corridor of cleared forest and breathed. The relief was physical. My legs went slightly weak. My hands shook for a moment before I got them under control. I had my equipment, my data logs, my 43 photographs. I had 32 days of contract remaining. I started walking south toward Yevgeny. I did not look back at the tree line. I told myself I was not looking back because there was nothing to see. I know now that I was not looking back because I was afraid of what I might find looking back at me. The logging road was a different world from the forest. Not safe. I knew that nothing about my location was categorically safe, but different. The road had been cut through the taiga by machines, and the scar it left was wide enough for light to reach the ground. And there were tire tracks in gravel and the smell of diesel still in the soil from the last run of the logging trucks. Human evidence. The marks of a human world imposed on the forest, and the forest pressing back in from both sides with its birch saplings and encroaching undergrowth, slowly reclaiming the margins. But the center of the road was open, and I walked in the center, and I could see 200 meters in each direction, and nothing moved on the road but me. I walked, and I counted my steps, an old fieldwork habit, useful for distance estimation, and after an hour I had covered approximately 5 kilometers, and the light was failing, and I made a camp on the road itself, in the gravel, without going into the trees for shelter or firewood. I used my emergency bivouac bag, which was not designed for comfort, but was designed for visibility, orange on the outside, the kind of thing that gets you found from the air if something goes wrong. I spread it on the road and got inside it, and lay on the gravel and watched the sky go dark above me and the stars appear, very bright and cold, with the dark walls of the forest on either side. Nothing came. The night was cold and clear and still. I slept in 3-hour intervals, waking to listen, and each time I woke the road was empty and the stars were where they should be and the forest was just dark on both sides, as forest is at night, and I could not hear anything moving in it. Whether it was there or not I cannot say. What I can say is that I did not hear it, and on that night, not hearing it was enough. In the morning, I walked the remaining 20 kilometers in one push. 8 hours of road, gravel under my boots, the forest falling away on both sides, the light improving through the morning, and the air warming slightly, the sounds of the forest changing as I moved south. More birds, different species, the particular acoustic quality of a place where people occasionally pass. I arrived in Yevgeny at 2 in the afternoon and sat in the one shop and drank 4 cups of tea that were too hot and ate 2 bowls of soup that were too salty and said nothing to anyone about what I had seen or heard or felt for 6 days in the forest to the north. The woman who ran the shop asked if the survey was going well, and I said there had been some equipment issues. She nodded and refilled my tea. Through the shop window, I could see the northern edge of the village, and beyond it the tree line 2 kilometers away, dark against the pale autumn sky, and I watched it while I drank my tea, and the trilene was ordinary and still and gave nothing away. I called the base operator. I reported the equipment issues. I drove back to Novosibirsk in the dark, stopping once for fuel, and I did not look in the rearview mirror at the road behind me more than I had to. I am not someone who does not go out. I go out. I work outside. I have spent weeks at a time alone in the wilderness without any difficulty. 3 days inside, curtains drawn, tea going cold on the desk, trying to write up my survey notes and finding that I could complete the technical data, coordinates, species counts, diameter measurements, but could not complete the observational log. Could not write what I had observed in the observational log in the flat scientific language the format required, because the flat scientific language the format required did not have the right words for it, and I could not make myself use the words that were available. I went back once. 8 months later, April, snow still on the ground in the shadows. Not to survey. I went to Yevgeny, and I stood at the northern edge of the village, and I looked at the trilene 2 kilometers away, and the feeling I had described to myself all winter as imagined, as retrospective anxiety, as the mind building significance around ordinary experience. That feeling was present and immediate and completely real. The forest was 2 kilometers away, and something in it was aware of me. Not visible, not locatable in any specific way. Aware in the way that large patient things are aware, as a weight, a direction, a quality of attention emanating from the dark space between the trees. I stood there for perhaps 20 minutes. I got back in my car. I drove south. On the road out of Yevgeny, I passed the track that led to the logging road. I drove past it. In the rearview mirror, the track disappeared into the trees. My photographs are on an external drive in my desk drawer. 43 photographs of tracks. 3 photographs of the empty ridgeline, taken minutes after I saw what was standing on it. I keep them. I don't know what I would do with them. Send them to whom? Say what? The tracks are large. The ridgeline photographs show nothing. This is the problem with evidence of things that do not want to be evidenced. It is always ambiguous in photographs and undeniable in person, and the gap between those two states is exactly the gap between being believed and not being believed, and I have learned to be comfortable living in that gap. It is not a comfortable place, but it is where the data puts me, and I have always trusted data more than I have trusted comfort. The satellite phone is on the shelf above my desk. Beside it, a piece of birch bark from the second day of the survey, before any of it started, when the forest was just forest and the work was just work and the container held. The bark is pale and smooth and smells of nothing now. The scent has long faded. I picked it up because it was beautiful, because the white bark against the dark ground was the kind of thing you pick up when you are a person who works in forests and loves them, before you have reason to reconsider what love means in relation to a forest and what the forest contains that you did not know was there. I hold it sometimes. I think about the second day, the frost on the ground, the pale blue sky, the work beginning, nothing yet wrong. Before I knew what was in it with me, the bark is the same bark. The forest is the same forest. The thing in the forest is the same thing in the forest. I am the only one who changed. I sleep with the lights on now. I notice this about myself without judgment, as a data point, as information about what I brought back with me from those 6 days. What came out of the taiga with me when I walked the logging road south and did not look back. Something came out. Not the thing itself. I don't think it left the trees. But some quality of its attention. Some residue of being watched by something old and very patient and entirely without a name for itself or for me. It is still there. I know that, and it knows where I went.